So let's talk Space Marine chapters in the Leviathan box. In the new age of 10th edition, what are the positives and negatives of painting the box up in each chapter's colours? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd take a quick video to talk about the Leviathan box, and particularly getting use out of the Space Marine half of it, and the different ways that you can field it within the Space Marine super faction in Warhammer 40k. In the video we'll talk through the Leviathan box contents, the way that chapters work in 40k 10th edition now, and perhaps a few of the positives and negatives of going for each chapter choice, both in terms of lore fit and gameplay for the box. First up, here are the models from the Space Marine side of the Leviathan box, already quite nice new sculpts, and some updated classics alongside some new miniatures. The box side is kind of character heavy. We've got a Terminator captain and librarian, a biologist apothecary, the scientist guy, a Primaris lieutenant with the combi weapon, the one who's done up as a Tyranid hunter, 10 Infernus Marines with the flamethrowers with a whole bucket of strength 5 attacks, 5 Stern Guard including a couple of combi weapons and a heavy bolter, 5 of the new chunky Terminators, and the Ballistas Dreadnought with the anti-tank fire. I would say that as a starter force for Space Marines, it does seem kind of nice, but also maybe a little bit on the incomplete side maybe. Perhaps the biggest issue is the characters not really working too well with the units. The Terminator squad has only room for one character to join them. You can't put both the captain and the librarian in them, otherwise that's too many. And the Gravis Apothecary as well, he's kind of out on his lonesome. He'd really quite like some aggressors, eradicators, or heavy intercessors to lead, otherwise he's not really going to be doing a whole ton for you, just doing battlefield science on his own. I still think it's really quite a nice core to build around though, and maybe just hints at a few ways to expand the army, potentially more Terminators, and a bit of Gravis armour for your Apothecary. For just using it as a fighting force on its own though, it definitely feels like it's a bit more of a range slant as opposed to a combat slant. It's only really the Terminators and the Captains that are particularly outstanding in melee, and even they can chip in a bit with their Stormbolters at range. The Terminators and Dreadnought feel like they're the big heavy lifting damage dealers of the box, with the Infernus Marines being very nice at barbecuing lighter infantry. They can stack out a ton of damage including Overwatch. Overall, certainly for Games Workshop standards, it certainly feels like a decent amount of models and points for the money that you put in. Around about 980 points of Space Marines on the board, maybe a little more if you give the characters some enhancements. For a lot of people who might be using the box to jump into Space Marines, one of the first thoughts that people have is what sort of chapter they might want to run them as. Are they going to paint them up as Blood Angels, or Ultramarines, or Salamanders or something? And what sort of in-game rules impacts might that have, positive or negative? Last time round when we had the Indomitors box came out for 9th edition, I made a similar kind of video. Things have changed a fair bit in 10th edition since then though, as previously you basically got different rules just literally because of the chapter that you picked. Now a lot of the more Codex chapters are kind of unified under the Gladius task force, and the Divergent chapters have their rules determined by different detachments now. And one of the biggest things that actually determines between chapters' power now is just literally the characters and unique units that they can field. And of course, though they're painted up as Ultramarines in the art, none of the models in this box are themes to any one chapter. They don't have any sculpted Ultramarine iconography on them, so you can paint them up how you like. I think perhaps the first thing to stress in 10th edition is that Games Workshop do seem to have made efforts to divorce rules from paint schemes. At launch, Space Marines basically have 6 different detachments, one for their more core Codex chapters, and the others for the more Divergent chapters that do things a bit weirdly. But in terms of actual restrictions on those detachments, it doesn't necessarily say that your army has to be codified as, say, Blood Angels to use a Sons of Sanguinius detachment. There's just a restriction to not use any other unique units from other chapters there, so no running things like Rubite Guilliman or High Marshal Helbrecht. I think people might still be a bit surprised if you were playing Ultramarines and you wound up to a table and you were running the launch detachment that was themed around Black Templars, but I don't think there's actually anything in the rules that would stop you from doing so. You could certainly just paint up your army as unspecified successors as well, and just use whichever rule set fit your tactics the best. Lots of people do that, but I feel like quite a lot of people also like to theme their army a bit, both in terms of gameplay and the lore, so I feel like chapter choice is still kind of important to people. For the way it actually breaks down, at launch Space Marine chapters are basically either the Codex compliant chapters, basically Ultramarines, Imperial Fists, and Raven Guard and the like. They're all basically aimed to use the Gladius task force currently, probably the detachment that's most in keeping with the Ultramarines playstyle, but they're going to get a few more themed detachments that operate a bit differently when they get their Codex, so you might well get, say, an Infiltration one that might well fit quite well with the Raven Guard. Currently, the only real thing that differentiates them rules-wise is their choice of characters, whether you have access to the Ultramarines ones or individual ones from the chapters. Otherwise, I guess it might just be fitting your fighting style and gameplay to the lore. Otherwise, the more Divergent chapters, like the Blood Angels, Black Templars and friends, they get their own launch detachments right away, as well as getting their own roster of special characters and unique units as well, though they might have a few restrictions. Currently, at least at time of recording, it feels like these more divergent chapters actually do seem to have a fair few more options than standard Codex Space Marines. Say if you collected Blood Angels, you'd be able to use their Sons of Sanguinius Strike Force detachment, and you'd also be able to have the choice of the Gladius. But say if you collected Ultramarines and had Guilliman and Tigurius in your force, you'd only have the option of the Gladius Task Force. The chapters with the best characters probably are going to have a bit of an advantage, which might mean that some of the ones that only say have one special character of their own, like say Iron Hands or Raven Guard, are probably going to be at a bit of a disadvantage, at least initially. Looking at rules initially though, if you are playing with that Gladius Task Force and using one of the Codex chapters, say Ultramarines, White Scars, Raven Guard, Iron Hands, Salamanders or Imperial Fists, they get the Gladius at launch, and their special rule is getting combat doctrines and moving through them. You either get to pick Assault Doctrine, Tactical Doctrine and Devastator Doctrine at the start of each battle round, though you don't get to use the same one twice. Assault Doctrine gets you to advance and charge, Devastator to advance and shoot, and Tactical Doctrine to be able to fall back, shoot and charge, all of which are really quite powerful boosts, either getting your guns in range or getting your assault units towards melee. For the Leviathan box in particular, the Devastator and Tactical Doctrines are pretty helpful for the close range shooting units, I think. Particularly perhaps the Infernus Marines, they really quite like the idea of being able to advance and shoot. I guess the Assault one could be helpful enough for getting Terminators into combats, but it might mean that they won't be able to fire their weapons as they go in. The Honour the Chapter stratagem I guess could be pretty handy as well for giving your combat weapons lance. That would allow the Terminators to punch up a bit against heavy hitting vehicles and things. Wounding on a 4+ is a lot better than wounding on a 5. Going through the lore and gameplay fit for the individual Codex chapters, I feel like the Ultramarines are really quite a good lore fit for the box. They are the models that they're painted up as, and the box set is sort of themed around the Ultramarines' defense of that Ogham world. The Terminator Captain has been said in some of those Warhammer community posts to actually represent Mr. Severus Agaman of the Ultramarines' first company, a company that's got a bit of a history with being devoured by Tyranids. I think the unit mix is kind of nice for Ultramarines as well, fairly balanced and tactically flexible, which seems to be their thing. Perhaps particularly the Stern Guard and the Terminators seem absolutely fine for them, plus a slightly heavier emphasis on characters fits their command structure. In terms of bonus rules, it basically is just that Gladius, but all of these Codex chapters might have interesting characters that you could add in as expansions. I guess for Ultramarines, Tigurius could be interesting enough with the Stern Guard, making them a bit harder to kill. Guilliman could be pretty massive leading just about any force as well. Double Oath at the moment is kind of massive, though I feel like he's maybe a bit more usable at really big games when that might apply more. For the White Scars, they're all about moving fast Mongol Space Marines hitting hard in combat from bikes. To be honest, I feel like the box set is about the worst fit for any chapter really. It's just a bit slow and stompy without any fast moving units and not really that much combat. Kossaro Khan will be allowed to lead the Stern Guard, though again really not a great fit for him, seeing as he's all about giving them a combat boost. It's probably going to be better with something else like Assault Intercessors. For the Iron Hands, I feel like there's maybe not quite as many heavy weapons as you might expect for one of their forces. Having a Dreadnought in the box though seems like a small win for them, being a bit more of a machine-focused army. I guess new very resilient Terminators stomping towards the foe isn't the worst fit either. They do like their durability. Iron Hands only have the one supporting character in Ironfather Phyros at the moment. In theory he could sit by the Dreadnought and avoid getting shot, but not join the squads at the moment. Unfortunately again he's maybe not super ideal for that Ballistas Dreadnought. The Dreadnought already rerolls hit rolls against most targets, so getting the +1 to hit on it as well as that is kind of overkill, and the two don't really work together amazingly. I suppose you could still repair it though. For the Raven Guard, they're all about the stealth and striking from the shadows, often on jump packs. They do maybe have a little bit more of a ranged focus from the chapter compared with most, and I suppose the Stern Guard and the Lieutenant fit alright with their sort of lore and theme. Definitely has a fair few units I wouldn't have considered first line lore appropriate for the Raven Guard though. For bonus characters, Shrike can operate as a lone operative, so you could have him jumping around the board. I feel like ideally he really does want some jump packs to lead though, either Assault Marines or Vanguard veterans. Making them not be able to be shot outside of 12 inches is all rather nice. Next up for the Salamanders, in terms of lore and theming, I feel like they fit really well. Salamanders are all about the raw might, massive annihilating fire with melter weapons and flamer weapons, plus a whole load of relics and artisan crafted war gear. In general they tend to want to play as a very slow and stompy chapter in the lore. I think they fit near enough perfectly with the contents of the box. Mass flamers on the Infernus Marines, fancy master-crafted weapons with the Stern Guard, and slow and indomitable Terminators with some fancy power weapons. Just all seems very on brand to me, even if you might ideally want a bit more melter. For supporting character options, the Salamanders have two. Ajax Agatone could lead the Stern Guard or Infernus squad, though I'd say it's probably better with Assault Intercessors. His buffs are combat buffs once more, so are better for them. Vulcan Hestan though, the Forgefather gathering the relics, seems pretty excellent with the Infernus squad. He gets to nominate one march target for 4 wound rerolls for either Melters or Flamers. Pretty excellent to just stack the sheer amount of strength 5 hits auto wounding the enemy. Seems like a reasonable enough expansion choice for the Salamanders to me. Finally, for the Codex chapters, for the Imperial Fists, I feel like it doesn't seem too bad for them. Maybe the Infernus Marines with Flamers aren't classically Imperial Fist defense line with bunches of bolters, but the Stone Guards seem to be fairly on brand, and the Terminators are really quite nice. Storm Bolters and Power Fists seem pretty good for Dornian defense to me. The Dreadnought being a bit of a tank hunting siege Dreadnought type thing, I think also helps out quite a bit. For options for supporting characters, Mr. Lysander could be interesting enough for the Terminators. Perhaps the main issue with that though is that you already have 2 characters to lead the Terminators, you probably don't really need any more. If you did have a squad led by him though, he does make them surprisingly tanky. -1 to wound against heavy weapons is really nice, as they're just the sort of things that want to be shot at Terminators. Tor Garadon maybe isn't as much use in this though, you can't really field him unless he's got Gravis armor to join. Moving into the more divergent chapters, and for Blood Angels, I feel like they're maybe not a great fit for this box set. They generally want to be in melee, particularly with jump infantry ideally, and they certainly don't have any of that going on. Their detachment rule gives you a +1 attack and +1 strength on the charge, really not too great in a very ranged focused box, though I guess it helps the Terminators. And the stratagems are maybe a little bit more geared to assault as well, as you'd probably expect. Red Rampage gives you a +1 to wound and lethal hits on a Terminator charge, and that does seem fairly terrifying against heavy hitters. Even the Blood Angel support characters don't seem particularly ideal for this though, given that they don't have any unique Terminator characters, and there aren't any jump packs in the box to escort their other guys. Not saying that you can't use this as the basis of a Blood Angel's force, but I feel like you'd need to add really quite a lot of themed units on top of it, and just kind of use this as a bit more of your firebase or models to hold the line. For the Dark Angels though, I feel like it's perhaps a little bit more on brand. A decent force of green Dark Angels I suppose. The Stone Guard veterans are now usable by them in place of their previous company veterans, a Dreadnought to provide a bit of firepower, and then a Terminator squad that you can paint up as Deathwing. They seem really quite nice for the Dark Angels, though aren't quite as themed miniatures as the actual Deathwing Terminator box set. I do kind of wonder whether when the Dark Angels Codex comes out, we'll get a proper Deathwing box that's at this new Terminator scale. For the Dark Angels detachment, their objective control never drops below 1. Occasionally that might add up to a few extra points when you get battle shocks from time to time, but I think it's actually going to be kind of niche when it applies, and probably isn't going to make a major difference to a game. Perhaps more of their strength comes from their unique characters and their stratagems. They can get the pop-up assault keyword if they need for Infernus Marines advancing with their Flamers, fall back and shoot and charge for 1 CP, though maybe a little bit less easy to access than the Gladius Tactical Doctrine. Fire on Death seems kind of nice for Infernus Marines, and perhaps one of the best ones is -1 damage in the charge phase, which is kind of excellent, particularly for those Terminators holding the line. For enhancements, I suppose you could make the captain a bit better in combat with that Heavenfall blade, and a few of the characters seem like they're reasonable enough to add in. Particularly if you wanted, you could add in a Deathwing Strike Master to give you lethal hits in the same unit as your captain. Kind of cool to get a Terminator Lieutenant. And other characters exist like Belial, who could make precision Terminators, or Azrael giving you a 4+ invul and sustained hits for Stern Guard. He just seems like very good value for the cost all around really. Overall maybe a better fit than the Blood Angels. The rules and character choices maybe support them a bit better, perhaps from having a bit more of a Terminator focus. For the Space Wolves, I feel like maybe the modelling aesthetics don't quite fit the lore and feel of the wolves quite as much. Generally they do tend to have a bit of their own style, with wolf pelts and talismans all over the place. I guess with a few spare bits though, you could definitely give them the right sort of look and feel. Straight from the box though, I feel like the Marines just look a little bit clean and Codex looking, which I think is okay for Blood Angels and Dark Angels, but might be nice to add a little bit more personalisation for the Wolves of Fenris. I feel like the Runic Terminator Librarian though is kind of nice for a Rune Priest for them. I think his model works rather well. Rules wise, their detachment rules are to unlock sagas that give you entire army buffs. I guess the Leviathan box isn't the worst for that, as it's very character heavy. More characters equals more chance to unlock the sagas, but even so I don't think it's a particularly strong rule even then, and particularly so in lower points levels where you're going to have fewer characters to unlock those buffs and fewer enemy units to try and take down for them. Their support does feel a bit on the limited side as well, falling back and shooting with a stratagem, a 5+ feel no pain type save against mortal wounds and psychic attacks, and their enhancements seem kind of okay. Maybe a -1 damage could be okay for lone characters that can't join other units, like either the Terminator, Captain or Librarian. The Wolves do have a lot of character options that you could potentially add in. There's lots of Terminators like Niall for stealth or Logan for a single turn of rerolls on them. Seeing as the Terminator squad has rather a lot of characters already though, maybe one of the most interesting could be Arjak Rockfist. He can be included in the same unit as the captain, and he helps out the squad a bit with a bunch of damage 3 attacks and some damage buffs if the squad gets depleted. They also have a battle leader in Terminator armor as well for some lethal hits as well. Overall, maybe not the best fit in the world for most of the box, given that they often tend to prefer a bit more of a melee-focused army, but the Terminators, and particularly the Rune Priest Librarian, do have quite a good feel for them. For the Black Templars, I feel like despite being a bit more of a combat-focused chapter, the models in the box set do fairly well for them lore-wise. Sternguard Veterans I think are okay, the Terminators crusading towards the enemy feels very Black Templar. They do use Dreadnoughts really quite a lot, and the Infernus Marines in particular feel very Templar. They even got them before everyone else did with that Pyreblaster Marine in the Crusader squad. Probably the biggest issue with the Leviathan box set though is that you can't use the Librarian as a Librarian in the box, as Black Templars famously abhor the Witch. I guess maybe you could do a little bit of converting and field him as a different Terminator character perhaps. Maybe kit bash a Crozius, give him a skull mask, and then you've got a Terminator chaplain. For their detachment rules, they're broadly combat focused, but there is one that's quite nice at range. They can take a 6+ feel no pain type save, which I think would definitely be the one to go for in the Leviathan box set. Just make all of your Space Marines just a little bit tougher. It's really very nice for helping out Terminators versus damage 3 weapons, or the other Space Marines versus damage 2. For stratagems, again they're maybe a little bit more combat focused. Devout Push could get your Terminators a bit closer. A 1 command point for a 3+ fight and death could be quite nice if you are using Uphold. And they've got one enhancement called the Tannhauser's Bones that could give you a 5+ feel no pain type save on the Terminators, yet more durability there. That one does seem rather good, and it's probably the one I'd go for on the Terminator captain. Otherwise though, I'd say their characters don't work amazingly well for the box set. Most of them are combat focused and ideally want to go in a combat squad that actually moves towards the enemy. A lot of them are locked to just joining Crusader squads, so I guess you need some of those to bulk out the force next. Still though, I think as combat chapters go, Black Templars maybe aren't the worst fit for the Leviathan box, both in terms of lore and gameplay. Finally, last but not least, we have the Death Watch. I guess for the idea of teleporting down and purging some Xenos, perhaps the Sternguard Marines and Infernus Marines fit fairly well with the close range firepower on infantry type theme. I do feel like they're going to have some pretty strong competition with their own unique kill teams though. They do have the Death Watch Veterans and the Proteus kill team, which would rival the Sternguard squad. I guess to be fair, you could probably just count the Sternguard squad as a Proteus kill team or Death Watch Veterans. Maybe count the Heavy Bolter as an Infernus pattern one. I think their detachment rule is fairly solidly useful for the Leviathan box. It gives you sustained hits, lethal hits and precision, each for a turn, all very useful. And again, being a more ranged chapter, I feel like it applies a lot more to the Leviathan box than some of the melee chapters. For their stratagems, I'd say they are all generally useful for infantry, things like teleporting things about, or the special issue ammunition types. But again, it really is a kill team efficiency focus here. You get 1 command point to use the stratagem for 2 kill teams, or just one other infantry squad, so it's going to be less efficient than having kill teams for the most part. Enhancements wise, you could get a double Oath of Moment for one of your captains with that Tome of Exoclades. That looks rather good. And for character leaders, I guess maybe the Watchmaster could be interesting enough. Lead a Sternguard unit counting as a Proteus kill team and give them a tiny bit of melee threat. Plus you get one of those rules to mess with an opposing stratagem. Could be nice to slap that on Overwatch or the command point reroll maybe. Overall, I'd say not the worst fit as it goes. Definitely more ranged focused, and even having a squad that looks like it could count as a kill team pretty nicely does seem pretty nice. Overall, just for a rough general take between gameplay and lore, here are the chapters that I'd very roughly rank the Leviathan box sets fit for. There are obviously absolutely nothing to stop you using it for any chapter. The units will have the same rules in most of them, but just might fit better or worse with certain specialist detachments. For the Codex chapters, I feel it's maybe best for Ultramarines, Salamanders and Imperial Fists. They're all kind of range focused in the first place. They all have characters that are potentially usable with the box set, and the Gladius Task Force is a good fit for them rules-wise. Otherwise, in terms of rules and models, I feel like it's a decent enough match for Death Watch and Black Templars as well. Black Templars can have some maximal purging with those flamethrowers, plus get a nice bit of durability army-wide, which is very usable. The only thing is that you'd have to convert the Librarian to something else, maybe a Chaplain. And Death Watch I think is kind of nice to get essentially a kill team in the box with the Sternguard. They've generally got rules that are kind of helpful, and the Terminators I suppose could even be used to fill out Proteus kill teams if you did pick up more of those. Kind of medium I'd rank the Space Wolves, Dark Angels, Iron Hands and Raven Guard, some solid elements that fit in with either their lore or their rules, but perhaps not ideal matches. And it probably feels like it's least appropriate for the most dedicated fast-moving assault chapters. White Scars technically won't really have any rules disadvantage, but it seems for about as far from their lore as you can possibly get. And perhaps the same with the Blood Angels. Their combat damage buff isn't really going to help out much besides the Terminators, and they do enjoy soaring through the sky on jump packs. Obviously this is all for a bit of fun, I certainly wouldn't take it too seriously, but I'll certainly be interested to hear what you might be running the Leviathan box as yourself. Have you chosen a chapter yet for your forces? If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.